If bitterness was cardio, Greg the Hammer Valentine would have been the fittest bastard alive. A lumbering monument to the kind of wrestling where men bled first and asked questions later, Valentine didn't just carry grudges, he suplexed them through the locker room floor and headbutted the rubble. While other guys kept their hatred kayfabe and their smiles camera ready, Greg strolled into shoot interviews like he'd just walked out of a steel cage match with human decency. He wasn't a gimmick. He was a forearm made flesh, no flips, no bullshit. Just pure, unfiltered hatred for anyone who didn't respect the business, or worse, didn't sell his goddamn offense. This wasn't your modern, he blocked me on Twitter level beef. No, this was, I shared a car with this idiot for 3 states, and he farted the whole way kind of personal. The kind of animosity that gets carried in a travel bag with boots and blade tape. So today, we dig through the scorched earth trail left by the Hammer and count down the top 5 real-life wrestlers he absolutely couldn't stand. This isn't backstage gossip. This is the gospel according to Greg. And buddy, it's stiff. You'd think being tag partners would breed some kind of brotherhood. Not with Greg Valentine. Teaming with Dino Bravo was like being forced to play tag with a wet bag of drywall screws. In the mid-'80s, these two were shoved together in a desperate attempt to make the Canadian strongman look like he wasn't built entirely out of bland meat and Pabst Blue Ribbon. Greg, he carried the team. Dino, he carried the tan. According to Greg himself in shoot interviews, Dino had no work rate, couldn't bump, and moved around the ring like a pissed-off filing cabinet. Valentine, who prided himself on being stiff but smart, had no patience for Bravo's sloppy, slow-motion offense that made Molasses look like cruiserweight lucha. And let's talk ego. Bravo thought he was a draw because someone's uncle in Montreal liked his bench press. Meanwhile, Greg's grinding it out every night, getting heat the old school way, by beating the Christ out of baby faces and chewing up time limits. Dino thought he was a top guy, Greg once spat in a shoot, but he couldn't go 5 minutes without blowing up. He was a shitty worker who only got booked because of his look. When Bravo got made the Canadian strongman and started getting pushed as the muscle-bound patriot of the North, Greg nearly stroked out. He thought he was better than he was, Greg said, and I was the one having to clean up the mess. Translation? Greg thought tagging with Bravo was like dragging a mattress through quicksand, except the mattress occasionally sandbagged you on a power slam. There was no tragic affection here. When Bravo died under, let's say, colorful circumstances, Greg didn't exactly write a poem. No crocodile tears, just a grim grunt, a shake of the head, and probably a muttered, he still couldn't work. If wrestling was a meritocracy, Brutus Beefcake would have been handing out towels at a gym in Tampa. But no, thanks to his friendship with the Hulkster, he got a gimmick, a push, and more TV time than a presidential candidate on cocaine. And Greg Valentine? Greg watched it all with the bitter expression of a man whose entire body was made of spite and leftover knee pads. Valentine's hatred for Beefcake wasn't subtle, it was volcanic. In multiple RF video shoots, Greg practically growled the words, calling Brutus a goof, a useless worker, and only famous for riding Hogan's coattails like a sidecar full of baby oil. The fact that Brutus couldn't wrestle his way out of a phone booth didn't seem to matter to the office. To Greg, that was the real crime. You could suck and still get the push if you knew the right guy. Let's not forget their time as opponents. Greg carried Beefcake to halfway decent matches the way a rescue team drags a broken donkey out of a mine shaft. Brutus, meanwhile, strutted around with hedge clippers, snipping people's hair like an over-caffeinated cosplay barber. Greg, who believed in believability, hard-hitting strikes, and actual wrestling, saw Beefcake as a clown act, a haircut gimmick in a business built on blood, sweat, and believability. Beefcake also had the audacity to believe his own hype. Greg once said, he actually thought he was a top draw. He wasn't. He was a sideshow, a joke. And the cherry on top? According to Greg, Brutus would go back to the locker room and act like he'd just gone 60 minutes with Flair. He'd talk about how good he was. I had to walk out before I hit him. For Valentine, Beefcake was everything wrong with wrestling. Flashy, phony, and protected. He wasn't just bad. He was bad and successful, which, in Greg's book, made him utterly unforgivable. Imagine you're Greg Valentine, a second-generation worker who cut his teeth in smoky armories and learned to sell like rent depended on it. Now imagine you're forced to share a locker room with a man who sprints to the ring like his ass is on fire, no-sells everything like he's made of granite and roid rage, and couldn't chain wrestle his way through a Fisher-Price My First Suplex DVD. That's the Ultimate Warrior, or as Greg probably calls him, that damn cartoon on speed. Valentine minced no words in his many shoot interviews. He didn't respect the business. He didn't respect the guys. He didn't give a damn about anything but himself, Greg growled, likely through a mouthful of Nicorette and thunder. And working with him? It was fucking horrible. Greg didn't just dislike Warrior, he despised him. In Valentine's world, Warrior was a walking sideshow. He didn't bump, he didn't listen, he barely even wrestled. He'd blow up in the entrance, Greg said, and then it was just punch, kick, clothesline, done. And he was dangerous. And not the good, worked kind of dangerous. The you might legitimately die because this idiot can't lift properly kind. Valentine once said Warrior was as stiff as a board and twice as dumb. That's from a man who worked with Wahoo McDaniel, so when Greg says you're dangerous, you're a one-man health crisis. Warrior didn't just make Greg angry, he made him bitter. He got pushed to the moon, Greg spat, and he couldn't wrestle a lick, but he had the look. That's all Vince cared about. Backstage? Warrior was just as unbearable. Aloof, self-important, disrespectful. He thought he was above everyone, Greg said, but he couldn't lace up my fucking boots. Coming from a guy who once made jobbers cry in practice matches, that's not an insult, it's a conviction. In Valentine's eyes, Warrior didn't belong in the business, and if he had his way, Warrior would have been gorilla pressed straight into a taxi and driven to a different industry. If Greg Valentine hated the other guys for being clowns, cowards, or cocaine-powered lunatics, he hated Cowboy Bill Watts for being a delusional tyrant in Wranglers, a man so tone-deaf to talent he could have booked Shakespeare to lose clean to a sack of dog food. Now let's be clear, Valentine wasn't some guy crying because he didn't want to lose. This is the man who made his career snapping legs like celery in grimy territories, not whining about wins and losses. But when Watts, WCW's head honcho at the time, decided that Valentine should show up out of nowhere and job to Sting like a paperboy getting squashed by a milk truck, Greg said, "Nah, I'm good," and walked the fuck out. In a move as cowboy as eating tofu with a spork, Watts demanded that Greg lose to Sting with zero storyline, zero build-up, and zero respect. Imagine spending 20 years busting your ass in rings with more blood than a Tarantino movie, only to be told by Yosemite Sam's racist uncle that you're gonna lie down without even a hot dog promo. Greg recalled in interviews, "They wanted me to do a job for Sting, and I just said, I ain't doing it." A man of few words and fewer fucks. To make matters worse, Valentine knew exactly what kind of egomaniacal egret he was dealing with. Bill Watts wasn't just old school, he was prehistoric, clinging to the idea that wrestling was only real if the ring ropes were made of barbed wire and the main event was a shootout in a barn. To the Hammer, Shawn Michaels was a twerking peacock in chaps, a guy who did backflips, super kicks, and posed like he was auditioning for a Bon Jovi tribute act, all while refusing to shut the hell up. Greg didn't just dislike him, he despised him. He said so plainly, with all the warmth of a cold slap across the jaw, I wouldn't sell for the guy. That's how much I hated him. And this isn't Greg throwing shade for fun. This is a man who worked with Wahoo McDaniel and Terry Funk, guys who would light you on fire if they thought it would get heat. Greg's beef with Shawn was personal and professional. Michaels came up in a different era, one of razzmatazz, high spots, and backstage politics. And Greg? Greg came from a time when a high spot was a headlock with feeling. According to Hammer, Shawn was everything he loathed in a worker. He didn't respect the older guys. He thought he was bigger than the business. Greg wasn't into that clique nonsense. He didn't want to play politics. He wanted to wrestle. And watching Michaels pout, politic, and put himself over was like watching someone slowly take a dump on everything Valentine spent decades protecting. And let's not ignore the locker room stories. Greg, with the dead eyes of a man who's seen too many coke-fueled ego meltdowns, once said, Shawn would cry if something didn't go his way. I didn't want to be around that shit. While others were doing curtain calls and backstage sabotage, Greg was counting down the days until someone smacked the eyeliner off Shawn's face. To Greg, Shawn was the new generation's prom king, smiling while the building burned. And the Hammer? He was the arson inspector with a pipe wrench and zero patience. He didn't just hate the game, he hated the glitter-drenched players ruining it. And there you have it. 5 poor bastards who managed to crawl under Greg the Hammer Valentine's skin like ringworm in a locker room towel. We're not talking about storyline heat or kayfabe nonsense. This isn't the stuff of worked punches and backstage whispers. This is real hate, the kind you can taste in your throat like warm Milwaukee's Best. From Dino Bravo, who was like sharing a ring with a bag of mashed potatoes soaked in hair gel, to Brutus Beefcake, the world's most useless sidekick who thought rubbing up against Hogan made him immortal. From the Ultimate Warrior, a man powered by cocaine, chaos, and complete creative bankruptcy, to Shawn Michaels, a man so self-obsessed he could have cut promos into a mirror. And finally, the old cowboy himself, Bill fucking Watts, who reminded Greg that sometimes the guy running the asylum is the biggest lunatic of them all. Greg Valentine might not have had the glitz of Hogan or the cult of Flair, but what he had was a spine, a work ethic forged in bloody mats and broken noses, and the kind of smoldering, old-school fury that today's soft-ass locker rooms wouldn't survive for 10 minutes. These five guys, they earned Valentine's hatred the old-fashioned way, by being themselves. And for that, we salute them. Long live the hammer. Fuck his enemies, and fuck a cowboy. Now, if you enjoyed this deep dive into Greg Valentine's Mount Rushmore of fuck-offs, do the decent thing. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who still thinks Brutus Beefcake had talent, because unlike the Ultimate Warrior's promos, supporting this content actually makes sense.